really what we're focused on today, as in the title, is 5 best practices to get more out of corporate innovation challenges. And just, already introduced myself, but Kobe Sconnard, founder and CEO at IdeaWake. I've been doing this about 9 years now. And, my passion is just helping folks grow in their innovation journey and get really involved in that with our platform and services. So just to go over agenda for today, first, we're going to set the context, just in general, why it makes sense to run innovation challenges in the first place. From some of the folks in the audience, this might be repetitive for you, so we'll just spend the first 5 minutes on that. Then from there, what we're going to do is the bulk of the presentation of covering those 5 best practices, combined with common mistakes that we see folks make when running innovation challenges. We have some small tips that don't get their own section, but just rapid fire tips at the end. Some resources to help you put advice into action, and then doing a Q&A session at the end. It's going to be an action-packed 30 minutes. Outcomes from today, really what we want to do is give you the tools and resources that you'll need to get, be able to actually take action from this presentation, and then really getting those best practices out, and just as importantly, avoiding common mistakes when facilitating these bottom-up innovation programs. So to set the context for today's session, what is an innovation challenge? So we have a very clear definition for it, but clearly defined, documented process for capturing, prioritizing, and actioning employee ideas. The main 3 components of that: there's a clearly defined and documented process from when you collect an idea, where it's going to go, how it's going to be communicated to the submitter, and wherever that idea ends up, the submitter is going to get context to where their idea is going and why throughout the process. It's communicated to all employees, regardless of role or title. And then ultimately, this one is a nice to have, but the long-term incentive structure is building it right into a manager incentive structure to help with mid-level management getting buy-in from. Just a little background on us. So I'm, like I said, founder of IdeaWake. So we're powering innovation programs using a software platform in over 39 countries, 185 cities. Primary reason that folks will reach out to us, building an innovation culture, driving some type of bottom line impact, all with an undertone of increasing employee engagement. Just some different ways we see the platform being leveraged. So a lot of these can fall under the blanket of innovation challenge. They just have different flavors, I guess, and a lot of the best practices that you're going to see and we're going to talk about today actually can apply as a blanket to most of these. And just, to set things off from the business case side of things. So we really believe that employees closest to a product or process have the best insights to improve it. These ideas go beyond HR improvements. So we do our own primary research. This is a survey that we did from 2021, focused on the employee attitudes around how well employers listen. So employees have ideas beyond HR improvements, most common one saving time, but I mean 29% of folks have ideas to improve products. Some of the other benefits, right? So most folks don't know Amazon Prime was actually an employee idea. So there are disruptive ideas within your organization in the places that you least expect. As an example, Amazon Prime was somebody in the software engineering team, whereas typically you'd think that would come from marketing. And once again, going into the reducing costs and increasing engagement piece. So the reduction of costs was on that previous slide in terms of percentage of employees that have ideas related to that. But something else that we did in that same survey was that we asked if your employers were better at listening and gave it a scale of 1 to 10. How much would it, materially increase your engagement? 90% of folks said it would have a strong correlation to increasing engagement and ultimately retention at the organization. So getting into our best practices. So first best practice is making sure to achieve strategic alignment with the organization and business units. A lot of the time, so for innovation teams specifically. So if you have an innovation team and you're tasked with going out and disrupting the organization, one of the issues that you run into is that there is a misalignment between the KPIs of the company as a whole, the business units that you're supposed to be partnering with and piloting with, and then ultimately what your innovation program goals are. So really what we want to do is, in order to set up our program for success, is to make sure that we first understand what the company UI goals are and what those short-term business unit KPIs are, and actually getting your innovation program goals and actually putting it onto a sheet, which I'll kind of show you in here in a moment. But the issue that we run into, once again, is that the business unit goals and the innovation program goals, 9 times out of 10, depending upon the organization when you're first getting started, don't align. Innovation team is often looking at longer term horizon projects, whereas the business unit is looking to achieve its quarterly goals. So basically what you're seen as is another thing to do versus a value add for their shorter medium term goals. And so ultimately it feels like you're climbing an uphill battle continuously. So obviously for our innovation program to be successful, we need to be able to pilot new solutions that we've conducted validation on, right, with these business units. And then we also need to be able to take the successful pilots that we've conducted and integrate them into operations. Otherwise, once again, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle the entire time. So going into how we can get to that destination, because once again, a lot of the time, the charter for this is going to be based upon you disrupting the organization, and that's what your KPIs are centered around. But if we look, right, going and starting and looking at like the goals that meet all three criteria, that's very rare that it does happen. Then going to looking at overlapping company and business unit goals. So actually starting somewhere which doesn't directly correlate to one of your KPIs, but does relate to a company or business unit KPI. By doing that, you can start to build a relationship and add value, and then really get a better understanding of what that business unit's needs are longer term. And then ultimately, right, you go down to number 3 right here. So we'll share out the slides after the presentation here, just so everybody has them and you're not worried about writing a bunch of notes right now. So going into putting this into action, like I said, we have a resource that we can share out, like a handout if anyone's interested, but we just put this together. Looks more complicated than it is. But what you do is write down all the departments that you're interested in partnering with for an innovation challenge. And then what you do here is write down the alignment between your innovation team KPIs and the business unit short-term KPIs, long-term KPIs, and then overall leadership team support from that specific business unit. That's going to give you a score right here, right? That gives you an idea of their overall propensity to partner with you. And then also down here, you're going to see for company-wide alignment, it gives you a better picture of how aligned your innovation program goals are with company program goals. I know that's a lot. Like I said, we have a handout and it like walks you step by step through how to do it. So we'll definitely share that out afterwards. So just to, I highlighted this a little bit before, but looking at the short and long-term goals, where we want to start is building buzz and quick wins, then making the business units happy, then being able to achieve our initial goals, and then prove the larger, longer term recurring value. The difficulty is a lot of the time leadership is expecting you to go to step 4 as the first step. So a lot of that is expectation setting as well, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Second best practice is having just an effective communication loop. We talk about this in every single webinar that we do, but reason is that from that same survey that we did, the number one reason that folks will stop sharing ideas, whether it's through an innovation challenge, hackathon, suggestion program, is because they feel like their idea fell into a black hole. The second one is not receiving recognition and feedback on their idea. So those two are correlated to each other. But I mean, we found from this survey that we did that folks care a lot less around whether their idea gets implemented or not. They care a lot more about the speed at which you're getting back to them and how quick the communication loop is. So just food for thought and why it's important to have a good communication program in place. And most people will think about just the initial upfront comms when we talk about a communication plan, but really it's involved after the actual challenge or innovation campaign ends. And if you have like a tool, a dedicated tool that you're using, a lot of this is automated, which is great. But even if you're not sending out individualized communications, making sure to keep people in the loop on after the challenge is over, giving updates on what actually came out of the program will help drive engagement for you longer term. So looking at the addressing this based on like stage of your program. So if you have an existing program and you have seen like engagement drop off substantially, what you'll want to do is, we've seen this a lot of times, you'll go through, rebrand the program and actually relaunch it and make sure to highlight the progress on ideas that were previously, like I'd said, submitted and ultimately implemented. And then after that, make sure to follow the tips under the new program section over here. So you want a solid comms plan before, during, and after. A challenge is going to go live. Once again, highlighting the after being, the most important probably. Then from there, allocating budget and time for the comms team in the scope as you're budgeting this out. I'm not sure if you're allocated based upon hours, right? But making sure that you have marketing and communications looped in. because during the sprint, right, you're doing this for like a month period, you're going to want as much communication going out as possible and want marketing and communication support. Touched on point 3 already. And then point 4 is build a champion network, which I believe we cover in the next slide. And let's see, coordinate with other project teams and link ideas to existing work with, that's going to be covered in just a moment as well. So champion networks, and just know you don't have to implement all of these. These are just best practices. And actually the 5th tip that I have, which you'll see in a minute, will help kind of level set everybody, because I know this is a lot of information all at once. But for that champion network, what you want to do is go to mid-level managers and identify folks that have the highest interaction rate with frontline staff on a day-to-day basis, just going about their daily working lives. What you do is you invite them in and make them innovation champions. So those innovation champions' primary responsibility is going to be promoting participation. And then depending upon how your program works, whether you're going to allow for like visibility of each other's submissions and commenting and voting and those types of things. Another thing would be helping elevate ideas through commenting and voting. And then the last piece would be shortlisting. But once again, the most important piece is the promotion. Everybody gets a lot of email every day. So having a mode where we're going to people in person or in a one-to-one chat works incredibly well. Just a couple of considerations when building this out. This is a really common question that we get is, do you build it, do you do it by location? Do you do it by department? Answer is that everybody loves to hate is it depends. Really, it's going to be based upon your organization specific makeup. Happy to have a conversation with anybody afterwards to help you identify like the best setup for your specific situation. The rule of thumb, though, if you have one location, you're obviously not going to base it on locations. You do it on department. If you're spanned across the globe and you have a lot of locations and you're running it with thousands of people, normally what we found works best because you can only go so far. Otherwise, it's going to take a year to get your program off the ground. So normally just having one person per location and making that person a higher level, like a director or senior manager level, often works best. Tip 3, providing some type of incentive to participate. So can't tell you how often folks do not offer prizes. So it does materially increase engagement in the short term and then the long term, depending upon whether you're communicating progress on the ideas that you're collecting. But just looking at, most common barrier to this is taxability of taxability of prizes that you give out. Just as food for thought, it doesn't have to be monetary prizes. Offering something like a one-on-one meeting with CEO or a department sponsored or a lunch sponsored for your department, as an example. So it can be a lot of different things. Some things which you already probably have the buy-in to do that don't require legal or compliance approval. We have found the monetary prizes work really well, though, as well. Looking at that longer term incentivization of participation, involving idea submitters in the actual testing and implementation of ideas is something that we've seen work really well, and really gets, builds out an entrepreneur inside of the organization versus just, having them do the ideation process. And then the second piece is tying participation and to the performance review and expectations so that it gets baked into the culture. That's really what we talk about, a culture of innovation in my mind. You're never going to be able to start here, but where you want to end up is right. There's no better way to define the culture than if it's actually tied to what you're getting evaluated on in your quarterly and annual meetings. So 4th tip here, not having an effective system to validate and execute is a mistake. And really what we want to make sure that we're doing is not overthinking this, which is the last tip, but just looking at, mapping out what the process is going to look and feel like. This goes through like the workflow and designing how you evaluate ideas. But really this section focuses on what you're going to do with the ideas once you shortlist them. But just to focus on this slide first, what you want to make sure is that the evaluation criteria tie back to the organizational goals that we talked about in tip 1. Whoever you're partnering with, you want to make sure that the things that you're shortlisting and evaluating ultimately are tied to a business unit's KPIs in order to make sure that it actually happens without you having to do a heavy lift. Making sure to engage stakeholders, right, that are going to be responsible for implementation or green lighting of the ideas in the organization. So often there's like judging committees for hackathons or innovation challenges, And the issue that you run into is that it's somebody from a different business unit that doesn't have authority for the types of ideas that are being collected. It's just looping in senior leadership so that folks get visibility to them, which is cool. Don't get me wrong. It's just one of the really common mistakes that we see. So just something to keep in mind. Then keeping the evaluation criteria simple, whether you're doing it in an Excel spreadsheet or in a dedicated platform, just no more than 3 metrics. And early on, what we find works best is to get, once again, quick wins implemented. So focusing on things that are easy to implement and making that a much higher weight, even more than, strategic alignment in the short term, just because getting some stuff implemented, communicating that back to the organization is super helpful in terms of building traction longer term. So going into, we're going to run out of time here. We talked about the bottleneck a little bit, but just going into the fundamental problem, right? There's a lot more folks that have the ability to submit ideas than there are that can implement them. And so just some mechanisms that you have for addressing this bottleneck. Some of them are not going to be, if you're just getting started, right, going to be more difficult to execute on. But routing ideas to relevant business units, that's normally where most people are going to start if you don't have a large budget for this program and are just getting kicked off. But once again, goes back to making sure there is a strategic alignment between the business unit and yourself. Then you have innovation strategy and R&D teams. That's a central hub within the organization. That's somebody good to build a relationship with early on when you're thinking about running these. External resources or partnerships, depending upon how much you're looking to scale, whether you want it to be an internal competency in your organization, it can be beneficial in the short term to go with external resources. But longer term, if you want to build it as a core competency, it's not going to help you scale necessarily. For idea submitters and frontline employees, that's one of the areas that we focus on, but kind of highlighted that in one of the previous slides as well. And this is the framework that we have. I know that folks, some of the H1, H2, H3, or incremental versus transformational has fallen out of favor over the years. We still use it here. Different tools and different lingo can be beneficial in different scenarios. So really what we suggest is not trying to run before you can walk. So what that means, and we're not going to go through this whole thing right now, but what we want to do, and this is like the framework that we've implemented and what we suggest for organizations when they're rolling this out for the first time, is trying to focus on walking, getting a high engagement rate and participation rate with some projected value, and implementing low complexity, short-term timeline to ROI ideas. And then as you get buy-in, right, because that's going to produce buy-in from leadership, it gives you an enabling event is what we call it in order to move over to run. Because a lot of the time you're going to try to do run or scale from the beginning, but you only have the resources for walk. And so there's a misalignment setting you up for failure from the beginning. So being able to implement this first builds you the buy-in more quickly to get to this stage, or ultimately to this stage if you're looking for it. Like I said, not going to go through this whole thing now, but we'll definitely share this at the presentation. So tip number 5, don't fail to plan, but don't over plan, otherwise you'll fail. So one of the most common things that we see is that organizations, because when you're doing this at any type of scale, right? So you have 1,000 people that you're targeting, or even 500. There's a lot of different cooks in the kitchen, I guess you could say. So a lot of the time, if you have a leadership team change, or just somebody new wants visibility into this initiative, there's going to be input coming from so many different directions that it's very difficult to get traction. So a lot of the time what we suggest, we just went through all the best practices from a planning and like launching standpoint. We do have a lot of resources that you can tap into for free in order to help get started. But the whole entire point is I would set as best you can a hard timeline from the planning phase of trying to get it up and running as quickly as possible. And then trying to freeze the scope at some point so that you don't have other folks coming in and trying to influence the project. Just like I said, something that we've seen, it is the most common thing we actually see. So programs that are supposed to go live within a 4 to 6 week time period end up getting delayed for 3 months plus, just because there's a leadership team change or something else happens. Priorities always shift, as I'm sure everybody's aware. So a lot of the time when it is a complex process, right? But if you overplan it, oftentimes it's never going to get off the ground. So just other common mistakes and just best practices. Something that we found, just using always open versus time-based challenges. So we kind of touched on that with the definition of an innovation challenge. So being able, if you want a space where folks can always come to submit ideas, run cadence challenge so that you have time-based, throughout the year. It just helps improve the participation rate. Make it easy to participate. Some of the stuff goes without saying, just you'd be surprised what we see every day in terms of the complexity for the submission form. We're just getting into the system specifically for folks. Just make that as easy as possible. You'll get people to come back. Starting with a proof of concept phase. So for larger companies, oftentimes getting a group of 50 to 100 folks to come in, that'll help you get started faster. And then it gives you the ability to work out the kinks and then scale it up quickly, versus trying to go live to everybody. You won't be able to work out those kinks. Oftentimes you run into a lot of the bureaucracy that we were talking about before. Not involving implementers and integrators in the evaluation. We covered that before, but just re-highlight, that's another really important one. And then not building a champion network. But I would say the best way to do it oftentimes is to run your first campaign without a champion network, and then build the champion network based upon the folks that come and participate that are manager of level. So with that, we are at about the 23-minute mark. What I want to do is just open it up for questions. If folks have any, this is always dangerous. If there aren't any questions, that's perfectly fine too. If I helped address most everything. But thanks everybody so much for taking the time. Hope that it was valuable to you. Oh, we got a hand raised. Just trying to look at everything here. Hi, Lindsay. Lindsay, I just gave you permission to come on.
Hi, thank you.
Of course.
Thanks. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. On this previous slide that said best practices,
Yes.
and I think I may have just missed something you said right at the very beginning. Everything on here seems to be a non-best practice. So are you saying that don't do these things? It's best practice to avoid these bullet points?
So I was going to say it's Monday, but it's not. So yes, it's best practice to use time-based challenges, not always open challenges.
Okay, so best practice to avoid these bullet points. Got it. Thank
Exactly.
you.
Of course. And just as we're waiting to see if any other questions come through, the resources that we have for folks, I think that a lot of the people in this call might already be working with us, but we have launch checklists, launch plan, and then if you don't have access to a trial already, more than happy to open that up for you if you're considering running one of these in the near future. So it looks like we don't have any open questions, but that's perfectly fine. Thank you all once again so much for participating today and joining. If anybody does have any follow-up questions that do come up, you can reach me directly. My email is going to be included in the follow-up, and hope that you all have a wonderful day and good luck to you on your innovation journey. Thanks, everybody.